Hi there, Barry Eaton here, and welcome to Radio Out There. Penny, it is delightful to meet you, because our mutual friend Sandy Shakespeare said, you have to talk to Penny. So I have to talk to Penny, so here I am. Hello, Penny.
Hi. I'm delighted to be here. And she is a sweetheart. So, yeah.
Now, why do I have to talk to you? Tell me about, because I know you had a corporate background. You've done all sorts of things. So why do you think Sandy wanted me to talk to you particularly? I'm sorry, right back at you, aren't I?
Well, probably because of my background I had a Kundalini. I had a whole bunch of Kundalini experiences, and my background in consciousness and perception, cognition, the fact that I teach intuition classes, how to develop and use intuition. And so by teaching, I've learned a lot more than what I started out with. People ask questions. And because I can often get answers, I go look to see, what can I see? What can I know? And I think the thing that is important is that information will just come. Once you have opened your consciousness, all information is available to you. And
it's trusting as well, isn't it? I find that if I don't trust or open myself up, not only my mind, but my heart.
That's right.
Yeah.
Yeah, you have to, I say to my students all the time, you have to trust your love. And I can see the wheels turn. But you have to trust that you love what you're doing. You love whoever you're working with. And it's not romantic love. No. It's a different kind of love.
No, it's not.
Yeah. And that love is something that is, if you can trust that, the information that comes in response to your questions, you have to then say what you see or what you know. And it's right, probably 99.9% of the time. Sometimes needs a tweak. Sometimes the timing is off, but the information itself is usually pretty valuable.
Yeah, true. Well, I think a lot of people underestimate the importance of the heart, because when I was writing my books on the afterlife, they told me on the other side that is where the soul, or the consciousness, connects with the body, at the heart. So we have heart and soul. So then it embraces us. So when we love somebody and we do it with a heart, that's also our soul. So to me, it makes perfect sense. What about you?
It does. And I think making perfect sense is a good way to start. One of the things that you learn in a Kundalini, when I had a full-blown Kundalini experience, not just one, not just two, not just three, but 3 years worth of those. And when you have that kind of experience, you go into the Godhead, and what you cannot explain, can barely convey, is the degree of love that exists in that state, the God state.
Yeah.
There's no way to convey what that love is like. Although I do hear people all the time who've had a near-death experience or another Kundalini experience of their own. They'll say, oh, there was this love. That love, it was just amazing. And it is. It's absolutely amazing. And what you realize, and I've got a whole theory because I love science. So,
not test tube stuff.
Not really test tube stuff, although I have done some of that. I worked with Dr. William Levengood. He was a biophysicist in the lab for 15 years, and he was teaching me plasma physics. And so there were some things that we did and a lot of experiments that we did with consciousness. Bottom line, everything is conscious. Every cell in your body is consciousness itself. Consciousness is what powers that cell. And when you put all those cells together, how many what, billion or trillion cells do we have in the body?
Yeah.
That's a lot of consciousness.
Yeah.
And I think if people could understand that we humans are designed to unfold into much more expansive states of being, much more powerful consciousness that actually is a tool that can be used for healing, for all kinds of things. And that unfolding is what we're here to do. And a lot of people are afraid and they're kind of frozen and they worry. They're not, and some of them are not prepared for any kind of change.
Oh, that's right.
But we have this natural drive. I'll call it a drive or a push or inner or something, pushing us toward becoming more. And in that, the pushing is done by our own consciousness. Everything is conscious, everything, and everything can be communicated with. And most people don't have time. They don't have time to stop and talk to the flower or talk to even the dog sometimes.
Unfortunately.
Yeah, right. Because sometimes, what about the tree? What about the guy in the car, 2 car lengths ahead of you that's going 30 miles an hour in a 50-mile zone? Those kinds of things.
Yeah.
You could
But talking
say
about science before, I think a lot of people, and myself included for many years, thought, oh, science, that's laboratory stuff. They've always rubbished spiritual areas, life after death, and so on. But now, I love it because the more I look, read, and learn, science is starting to come around to the fact that life is not just material, it's not just physical. And the opening up, I find a very exciting thing because we are in an age of transition.
Oh my, that's kind of an understatement.
Yeah.
It's a big transition.
Yeah.
We're moving from 3D people to being 4D people, and there's a different kind of consciousness. And that consciousness is not the kind of consciousness that comes and takes over. It's the kind of consciousness that you have to say, I want to be like that.
Yeah, fair enough.
I'm
Now,
going
before we go
to
on to the 3D and the 4D, and what, I want to talk about that. But
Okay.
I want to go back because there might be a few people listening or watching to us at the moment thinking, hang on. You mentioned Kundalini before. I remember reading about that or hearing about it. So just because there was a lot of work done about 15 years or so ago, Kundalini was very much not in the headlines, but a lot of people were practicing, learning the benefits, whatever, but it seems to have slipped away lately. So tell us a bit about Kundalini, because I think that's an important first step to what we're talking about.
Okay. Yeah. I have to say, it really is a turning point in an individual's life. Kundalini is a massive, it can kill you, energy event in the body. It's an electromagnetic wave or frequency or pulse or voltage, whatever you want to call it. It's an electromagnetic event that moves up through the spine, hits the brain, knocks you out, except that it just knocks you out of the body. It doesn't take away your awareness. You move when it hits the brain. What you end up with is you're in this state of absolute blackness. It's called the void. The ancients called it the void. And there's nothing there except these billions of little tiny pinpoints of light that looks like you're looking across the entire cosmos. And the most distant galaxies are these little tiny pinpoints of light. And everything there's nothing there. There's no thought. You have no awareness of yourself as an individual. When you enter into the God state, you become all that is. And your sense of self, your knowledge of, I've got a wife or a husband, I got to feed the dog, I got to make the mortgage payment. all of that goes away. And there's a bliss there that is absolutely paralyzing. It is absolutely stunning. Well, when that electromagnetic force moves up through you, it hits each chakra as it goes up, and it rewires your entire system. And overnight, you have access to all the information in the world, anything you want to know, and anything you don't want to know. It all comes in. You have this. You have all the clairs: clairvoyance, clairaudience, clairsentience, clairnascence, clairgustance, your tongue. Clairgustance, clairnascence is being able to smell somewhere across the world or in a remote viewing session. And clairgustance is being able to look at a plant or read a recipe even, and know what that's going to taste like. Or if it's a plant, know what effect that plant is going to have on your system. And so those are handy skills. But if you don't have any background, that's really disturbing. All of that information pouring in, you can't turn it off. I did not know how to turn it off in the beginning. It took about 3 years. You don't sleep. You discover consciousness has no need to sleep. The body does. So I would go to bed every night and lay there wide awake until it was time to get up in the morning. Sometimes I would I'd be out of the body. I'd go up on the roof and sit because there was just nothing to do. And I watched the world at night. It was very instructive. But I was dead dog tired for 3 years and struggling and sure that I was going crazy, that I had lost control of my perception. And at that point, I was an engineer for Chrysler Corporation, and I was trying to get through every day without letting anybody know what was going on. But oh my gosh, a lot. So much. Eventually, I had to leave. So Kundalini, what happens, and I'll say this across the board, when you have a Kundalini event, the ancient Eastern definition of Kundalini is the full spontaneous awakening of consciousness.
Awakening. I always thought that word awakening is Kundalini.
Yeah. So Kundalini, when consciousness awakens, leaves you in a place, and this is one of the things that I have said to people, why? Why does Kundalini move you from concerns about the material, concerns about consciousness? And it's because that's the next stage of our development.
That's right.
Consciousness has to be developed. And so I've been developing my own consciousness for 45 years now. And there are many, many skills, many things that I have learned to do, that I teach actually in my classes. And people are able, eventually what people want is to be able to put all these pieces together that they hear from this source and that source and into a coherent system of consciousness. And that's where we're headed as a population. And so Kundalini leaves you with some very unusual abilities. That's actually why I got invited to go to work with Dr. Levengood in the lab, his laboratory. He was researching crop circles and bovine excisions, animal mutilations, and people who had unusual abilities, and ET landing sites. And so because it was very interesting, the work that he was doing. He couldn't, he said, I'm an old man now and I'm going to do whatever I want. And I'm going to, I'm going to research what I think the world is going to need. And so I ended up writing a book about our work together. And I kind of dragged my feet on that a little bit because I was afraid he was going to leave as soon as it was done. And by gosh, he did. And I was like, "Mom." So I haven't had anybody to work with for 10 years now. He's been gone for 10 years. And he was maybe 86, 87 when he left. But he didn't go very far. He just, he's still around.
Of course he is. But he left knowing that you were okay to be left to get on with it.
That's true.
Sure, at that soul connection, I feel that you had a soul connection.
Yeah. Yeah, he was just a wonderful, wonderful man. We had been meeting and talking 3 or 4 times a year, meeting in the lab and talking on the phone, maybe 5 or 6 times a year. And he said to me one day, "Would you write about my work? I can't get published. I've been blackballed." And I said, "No, I can't. I don't have time." So he let it drop. He came back again a little bit later and said, would you consider writing about my work? I think the population needs to know this." And I was like, "No." And the third time he asked me, I was a little shy about saying no again. I knew he really wanted that, but I said to him, "Lefty, I don't understand or know the science." And he said, "Oh, let me teach you." So we entered into this mentorship that lasted, for the rest of our time together. And we met once a week, and he was always organized. He would have a few points. And so he taught me plasma physics and biophysics. And I ended up being the beneficiary of his knowledge, a lot of his knowledge, and the inside scoop on all of the work. And plus, we did some work. And toward the end, he said, I kind of wish we had focused a little more on consciousness. We did quite a few experiments. And he was like, "Oh my gosh, how did you, sitting at your house 100 miles away from him, how did you make that needle move in the way that you did?" He had 2 of us that could affect the equipment from a distance. And he said, I think we should have focused on consciousness a little more. But in the back of the book, Consciousness and Energy, Volume 2, he said, "Here, let me put this as an appendix." And it was a paper, kind of like a white paper, and he titled it "Toward a Science of Consciousness." And he said, "This is for the scientists out there." And I said to him, "Why do you want me to write about your, what you're doing?" And he said, "Because you have a knack for taking really complex, sophisticated stuff and making it clear."
That's
and I was
definitely a gift.
Yeah, I was afraid that I wasn't going to be able to do that with plasma physics. But by gosh, once you understand it, it's very simple.
Yeah.
So it's easy to explain to people. So
now, Penny, just before we move on a bit here, one thought when I heard your Kundalini awakening, I thought, now that sounds pretty extreme. And I'm wondering, are there degrees of Kundalini awakenings? Do people who might be listening or watching now think, "Oh my God, I didn't have that. I thought I had a Kundalini, but I didn't take me 3 years to get over it. I didn't lose a lot of sleep or whatever." So I guess there are various degrees of awakening. Have you found?
That's a good point. Yeah, there are degrees. You do not want the kind that I had, which is full, spontaneous, explosive. The kind that I have, it starts with a rumbling sound, this deep, deep, deep rumbling sound that becomes as loud as if you were standing next to the afterburners on a jet engine. It's kind of intense. You become that sound. The second thing is that there's an incredible amount of shaking. I thought we were having an earthquake. It was me having the earthquake. And then boom, I was completely gone. Yeah. And so that's the most extreme. There are degrees of partial awakening, and they're much easier. They're powerful. And I was just telling students this weekend about a guy, I can't remember who it was. It was one of the Eastern fellows writing in a book that was edited by John White. And he said he was meditating, he was doing this whole meditation thing. And he said all of a sudden there was this feeling of almost like a sexual feeling coming up through the center of him. And he went up to his waistline and went back down, and then went up a little higher and went back down, and then went up to the heart and went back down. And he said it was 1,000 times better than any sex you would ever have. And he said it just continued like that. Now that's a very gentle kind of awakening. If it stops at the heart, you will open to unconditional love. If it stops at the throat, you will not be able to refrain from speaking truth and developing the skills of language and oratory. If it stops at the third eye, you will be clairvoyant. If it stops at the brain, you will enter into the Godhead. Actually, it doesn't stop at the brain, but if it hits the brain, you will enter into the Godhead, and then you know what God is, and you understand all of creation. So, even just a little bit. Another form of Kundalini is you could be walking along doing whatever, and all of a sudden you have this incredible feeling that you are everything in the world. The soil you're walking on, or the sidewalk, the birds in the trees themselves, everything in the world. And that can last for 2 or 3 days. And then there's another form of awakening in which you have that kind of a moment. One of my students described it, actually 2 or 3 people have described this kind of thing. They're doing something, okay? They're busy doing something with their hands, and they happen to look up and lock eyes with somebody. And in that moment, if it's an unguarded moment, because most people are very guarded, they said, and I've had this, it felt like I fell into a black hole in which everything blanked. And that opened them up to a level of love and caring and function that they never could have imagined. So that's another, just an unguarded moment with somebody. And no, you become that person for a split second, and that reorganizes you. And then you come back to being yourself, but you bring back that reorganization, and now you're totally different. So
people, if they want to create, ask for, through meditation, put out the thought out to guides or universe, I want a Kundalini experience, or is it something that goes at the soul level? You can't just sort of say, oh, I've got nothing to do this weekend, should I have a Kundalini experience?
Okay. Whoa, be careful.
I'll stay home. I'll promise we should.
Okay.
No, seriously, though, I mean, it's not something that it's not something you can treat flippantly. It's life-changing.
Yeah. And when I say it's life-changing, I'm not fooling. My whole career as an engineer went out the window. I just, there's no way. Well, I actually wrote about that. It's like, oh my gosh, what if somebody else out there is dealing with this kind of thing? I need to write this down. Maybe it would be of help. And so that became my first book, The Evolving Human. but it's not something, I mean, I had never heard of Kundalini. It took me 3 years just to figure out what, was there a name for this? Was there a diagnosis for this? What was happening? People meditate on purpose to try to activate Kundalini for years sometimes and never have it.
Yeah.
So, yeah, it's something that is pretty, it's a critical change. It's a change in the state of the human being.
Well, as far as I'm concerned, we are all here as the evolution of our soul. So some people will be ready to evolve right now in this lifetime. Some people will not be evolving in this lifetime. It's a bit, everybody is on a unique trip through life, a road trip, I refer to it as. And so it's hard to sort of turn, all right, time for Kundalini. But I know with mine, I went through something totally different than what you've described. We won't go into it here, but it certainly opened a door, changed my life totally, absolutely, totally. So it will vary. And I guess it's wonderful to know that there is information around people like yourself that can help those who are going through it and thinking, what the hell am I going through?
I know, that's true. Yeah. I mean, I can't tell you. Another thing that happens in Kundalini, besides no sleep, is crying. You see how everything could be different if we just had a little love. And you end up grieving not only the past, for me, it was 30 years of, moving through life and trying to get somewhere. And that you realize all the mistakes you made, all of the things that didn't have to be the way they turned out being. And there's a grief in that. And there's about 1.5 to 2.5 years of crying. And everything makes you cry because the heart is open and it's loving and grieving at the same time. Very, very powerful. So, yeah.
All right, look, we do have a little bit of a time limit, and it's wonderful to talk about that because I don't think I've ever had such an involved chat about Kundalini, and thanks a lot for that. But you mentioned something earlier on, and that was about the dimensions. Now, most people say, oh, yeah, we're in a third dimension, and we're doing, and obviously, there are many other dimensions. We can look at a lot. I've written some about it in my some of my books. But let's talk a little bit about, for those people who are not quite sure, and they think, oh, yeah, but third dimension. Well, what does it mean? Why? When am I going to the fourth or the fifth? Do I have to pass an exam or what?
Yeah, just about.
Just about. Yeah.
The best way to understand it is the reality that we have is a result of the consciousness we hold. Okay. So, hang on 1 second. So I have this chart. It's on my website, pennykelly.com. And it's the dimensions of reality. And I'll just read a couple of them so you get an idea.
Yeah.
So third dimension, people have full physical denseness. Your molecules are really packed in there tightly. Okay. Fourth dimension, you have full physical density. Fifth dimension, you're less physical. Okay. So that's one thing. Third dimension, very competitive. Fourth dimension is what I call cooperative beginning. Fifth dimension is cooperative complete. And if you haven't had some fifth dimensional experiences, it's hard to imagine what kind of cooperation is available to you at that level of being. Wow. So I'll just leave it at that. So third dimension is very destructive. A lot of stuff, well, we got to dig up this and we got to burn that down and we got to cut that down and blah, blah, blah. Fourth dimension is not destructive, it's corrective of matter and materials. Fifth dimension is corrective of matter and the interactions of energy. So they move, the dimensions are states of consciousness in which the individual has an attitude toward life that either cooperates or competes, and destruction versus correction of matter and materials. Correction means, I broke that, let me fix it, or whatever. But you can only fix it so much, so far. You know, if I break this pen, it's broken. I really can't fix that. But fifth dimensional people, if they care enough, they can, because they can change energy and its interactions. And so healing happens. So third dimension is winner takes all. Fourth dimension is based on do no harm. And fifth dimension is do no harm and create, correct, balance among systems and entire worlds. And so your perspective becomes much bigger. And I have 5 pages of differences. They're fine differences, subtle. Some of them are very subtle changes in consciousness, but it results in a different kind of world. And that's what the evolution of consciousness, or the evolution of the human being. I think I said at the beginning, we are designed to evolve, to become creatures that are much more powerful, much more expansive, much more loving. And as that occurs, your consciousness changes. Telepathy, able to live 2 to 5 times longer, as these are fourth dimensional characteristics. Your interests are interplanetary at a minimum. Right now, that's not, most people in 3D are confined to the planet. That's their, and so there's a lot of, subtle differences, and some are very stark. But when you change your consciousness, you start changing the kind of world that you're going to end up with.
Okay, so now we're talking here about consciousness while in the human body, in a physical form.
Yeah,
now, my research on the afterlife shows that, yes, we do move into another dimension once we leave here. Third dimension, there's no such thing as, it's all time. Once we move out of the third dimension, there's no such thing as time. But then as the soul evolves, then we move higher and higher into other, not only other dimensions, but other planes within these dimensions. And there's a lot more than the fifth dimension. It goes on and on.
Oh, yeah.
Now, I've been fortunate enough to be able to be helped to be able to access some of these higher dimensions, and I've had some amazing experiences, absolutely amazing experiences. So, to me, what we're talking about here has been like the physical dimension where we evolve there, but then the spiritual dimension is the one that we really intrinsically are wanting to be involved in, because that is who we really are. We're only here in human form to have a human experience.
Okay, so in my experience, I have a slightly different but compatible point of view. So spirituality is just energetics. It's just frequency. Frequency is consciousness. Okay, so, and there's a whole theory, if you learn it, it's not difficult, but frequency is consciousness. So the kind of frequency you have is going to determine the kind of consciousness you're going to have, and the kinds of responses you can make to things. And so when you move there, you're right, there's so many more dimensions. I limited my chart here to third, fourth, and fifth because most people can't even get their mind around third dimension. They're like, okay, what? You're talking about the third dimension? What do you mean? What do you mean? And so fourth dimension and fifth dimension, that's really exotic to them. But the frequency signature that you exist at is going to determine your ability to enter into other dimensions and have or recognize and experience there. And I've had a lot of those myself. And, you know, when you're talking, I'm like, oh, yeah, there's a lot of people who have had experiences that they can't quite characterize because they aren't in this dimension. There's time everywhere, but not time as the third dimension knows it or sees it. Okay. So we'll just leave it at that. The time signature of different dimensions is vastly different from what we have here. And once you know that the mechanism of that, it's like, oh, okay, I get it. And you begin to realize that even though there's people who say, no, time travel is not possible. Oh, yes, it is.
It is. But there's also the dimension of reality. Now, I had a conversation with a wonderful man who has passed on recently, unfortunately, a wonderful explorer in the spiritual area, many, many years. And Duncan Rhodes is the editor and publisher of Nexus, is on my program regularly. His father, Michael, and I had a long conversation at a consciousness conference, actually, which I was emceeing a few years ago. And I said to him, all this bit about all the planets are just vacant and bare and nobody living there. I said, that to me is rubbish, because I believe, and I've been sort of, whether I've learned this from my own little interdimensional visits or what, I don't know, but these planets exist in another dimension. We are looking at them through a third dimensional reality. But there is a life form there, but in another dimension. We can't see it. We say, oh, they shouldn't, because we're looking for human beings. Well, human beings aren't the be-all and end-all. So I know we're getting into a different subject here, but I find the whole area of dimensions such a fascinating subject.
It is. It really is. And I have to share this comment. In the early days of Kundalini, this group of little men in brown robes kept coming to visit me, and they wanted to show me pictures. But they made a comment at one point, and it was along the lines of, well, the bodies you have right now are not particularly valuable. And that came up
like an old car.
I know. And I was just like, what do you mean? And, you know, I was so parochial back at that point in time. And after a while, I came to realize that there are other forms that we inhabit in other dimensions. I've done a lot of research into planes and dimensions. In fact, in Consciousness and Energy, Volume 1, I started out as like, okay, I'm going to research. I hear people talking about dimensions and their angels, and I don't think they know what they're talking about. So that was my attitude. And I didn't know. And so I thought, okay, let's go research. And I spent 6 years studying, visiting, you know, observing, experiencing planes and dimensions. Wow. There are many, many other bodies that we have. I discovered that we exist in more than one place.
We're talking about parallel dimensions here.
I mean, there's just a whole bunch. Where do you go every night? Where do people go?
We could be having this conversation we could be having this conversation in many other worlds right now in a different way. But unfortunately, in this world, we have just run out of time.
Are we out of time?
Okay. To the third dimension. Time.
That's okay. We'll give people some things to think about or questions to develop. And that's good for people to be asking. So, so we'll just let it go from at this point. Okay.
It is. Now, if people want to find out more about you, maybe get in contact, do you have online classes you do, or are they all face-to-face?
No, I have a website, pennykelly.com. I have a Patreon. It's patreon.com/pennykelly. I am on YouTube. I'm on Rumble. I'm on BitChute. I'm trying to think
Oh,
of
you,
all the
you
places.
get around, don't you?
Yeah, and then some podcasts as
All
well.
right.
Just audio podcasts.
So look
Again,
online and you'll find all sorts of things with Penny Kelly
that's right.
there.
That's right.
Fantastic.
My books are on Amazon if you want a physical book. If you just want to download a book, you can go to my website.
I like
So
a physical book. I want something to look
I
at
do too.
and
I
touch
do too.
and feel.
Yeah, and
That's
turn
what
the
I'm moving
pages.
toward. Yeah.
Yeah.
Penny, look,
Oh,
it's been wonderful talking to you, and thank you so much.
oh,
And
oh, you're
look,
welcome.
we should talk for ages and ages. So I'm sure when we talk again, I know we will, we'll
Yeah.
have lots more to talk about.
Okay. Yes. Yes, we will. It's a big world. It's a
It is a
big
big
set
one
of dimensions.
and a lot to learn about. And maybe next
Yeah.
time we'll talk about that transition that we are all going through right now.
Oh, okay.
Oh,
Oh my.
okay. Bye
Yeah.
now.
That's a big one.
And for more information about Penny, check her website, pennykelly.com. You can find out her books, her courses, everything there. pennykelly.com. And that's it for this week on Radio Out There.